Good morning. We ready to go, Michelle? Hope everyone had a good evening. And I hope everyone's prepared for the last part of the in-person meeting, where we're going to deal with two topics. We're going to approve, hopefully painlessly, our PI and listed entities effectively conforming amendments as a result of IAASB changes to the code. And then we're going to deal with some changes that we made on IAASB 5000 as a result of comments, and Josephine will walk us through both of them. And so I think that to be efficient with time, the best thing to do would be hand it over to Sue.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks everybody. I will kick off with thanks, because as we're approaching approval, obviously it's important to recognise the work the task force has done. So the task force of Chunwei, Fernando, Susan, and IAASB correspondent member Sung Nam have all put a lot of effort into this. Also thanks to Josephine as the former chair of this for leaving us in a good position, and Len Dewey was a previous member of the task force. And of course, we wouldn't be where we are now without the hard work of the IAASB team. Kalina has done a lot of the heavy lifting, more recently supported by Ida, and Billy has been providing oversight. So thank you to everybody there. Next slide, please. So just highlighting a couple of points that I didn't raise on Wednesday, just the coordination and outreach that we've been doing. Particularly at the last meeting, it was suggested that we reach out to the two monitoring group members, and we've held calls with the IFIAR Standards Coordination Working Group and the IOSCO Auditing Subcommittee. That was the staff and myself, and we had the opportunity to explain the rationale for our approach in amending the requirement in 28C of ISO 700. And we shared some insights from the comment letters around how the practical challenges that there would be in taking an alternative approach. So I think that they were constructive discussions, and we will include that rationale for the approach we've taken in the basis for conclusion. Obviously, we've also continued the collaboration and coordination with IAASB, both through the staff involvement, and also we have a correspondent member, Sung Nam, as a member of the task force. The IAASB PI rollout group provided an update to its board in June this year on the progress with track 1, and they expressed their support for the proposals that we have to operationalise the transparency requirement in the IAASB code. And they also noted that they have on their work plan, I think for later on this year, to discuss and present to IAASB proposals to address the circumstances where the auditor's report may not be public or may have limited distribution, which was a topic that I know was some earlier discussion for us. Next slide, please. Just to a reminder of the project objective that we were addressing. On track 1, you should be familiar with this, but it set up the project proposal. And we've also highlighted on there some of the qualitative standard setting characteristics from the public interest framework that were of most relevance. You've got a full analysis in the issues paper, but obviously there are some very key things here around coherence and making sure that we are aligned with the IAASB standards. And there was a lot of feedback on exposure around implementability, and that's something that has driven our approach. So as I say, just a reminder on the public interest framework, it matters there. Next slide, please. So this is where we get into just a little bit of the detail. We circulated the paper on Wednesday, and I highlighted to you that there were 2 small changes that we were going to bring back to respond to feedback we've had from a couple of board members. I've put the complete revised text up there because obviously we are looking at approval. So in paragraph 16A, which is the new paragraph in ISO 260, we had feedback, but that using the word "and" suggested the independence specific to audits of certain financial statements audits of financial statements of certain entities appeared to be separated from the independence requirements. So we are proposing reverting back to the phrase including, which we had in the previous draft. Obviously, if anyone has an allergic reaction, then please speak out on these. And then the next slide, please. The other amendment that we are proposing is on the third bullet of paragraph A29 of ISA 260. In the second to last line, the phrase "they consider that," we had questions around who we meant by they, and actually when we looked at it, we felt the phrase could disappear and the sense is still retained. And then you will just notice that on the very top line, there's very much an editorial which is taking out the word "the" at the end of the line, which is to make the phrasing we've used consistent with what's been used elsewhere. So those are just the two slash three small tweaks that we would like you to keep in mind as we approve the document, hopefully. Next slide, please. We've also been considering matters to highlight in the basis for conclusion. I mentioned earlier the rationale for our approach is something that we will include in there. We also recognise that there have been mixed views about whether to include an example in the basis for conclusion about how we describe the relevant ethical requirements as applied when ISA 600 applies, so the reference to consolidated financial statements. Our proposal that we've outlined, I think, in the agenda paper is to include that, but if people have strong views, we would appreciate that. And then we had a suggestion to include in the basis for conclusion or to highlight that track 2 will address the requirement in paragraph 17. So to provide that linkage with the changes that we've done in 16A to the work that will be coming in track 2 on to streamline that more. So next slide, please. That's the overview I have, Tom, and to bring everybody up to speed with what we have. And I think it's back over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Sue, for that explanation. I forgot to welcome Sungnam Kim, who's joining us from IAASB as correspondent member on our PI task force. So welcome. It must be good evening for you. Okay. Any comments for the task force? I thought Bill was reaching for his card. He was just straightening it. So that was a relief for me for a second. I feel like we've discussed this in such detail and you've been so responsive to approach. Before we do anything else, I think, Jim, you have any observations?
Thanks, Tom. I guess my quick observation is that Sue and the task force have kept the CAG informed throughout the process, and the CAG was supportive when we last met of where the task force has landed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Michael, I know this was the PIOB is viewed coordination with IAASB as a top public interest priority. So I'd welcome your insights and observations of where we are today.
Okay, thank you. No, it is good that that there's been active coordination with IAASB along the way, and also the outreach to the monitoring group members to discuss the approach that you're taking and explain that, I think was a very useful step that was taken. So appreciate that, and it's good to see this track coming to a conclusion.
Okay, because everyone, before I turn it over to Billy for a couple of matters, is everyone clear and ready, clear on what we're going to vote on and ready to vote to approve the standard, the amendments to the standard? Okay, Great. Billy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. So I just need to deal with a few due process issues that are included in section 2 of the issues paper in agenda item 5. And then for final approvals, we also need a separate statement about due process that was included as a separate agenda item 6. So firstly, in the task force's view, the significant matters it has identified as a result of its deliberations since the beginning of this project and its considerations thereof have been reflected in the agenda material presented to the IAASB at this meeting. In the task force's view, there are no significant matters it has discussed in this project that has not been brought to the IAASB's attention. Furthermore, the PI task force does not believe that a consultation paper, field testing, or a roundtable is warranted, as the proposed amendments are limited and narrow in nature. And then finally, I refer the board and official observers to agenda item 6 that sets out, as stated in its objective, the status of due process followed in relation to this project under headings that address background as well as due process up to the date of this meeting. I further advise that due process has been followed effectively and with proper regard for the public interest in relation to the development of the narrow scope amendments up to as well as including the June 2023 IAASB meeting. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, so we're going to look to approve the proposed narrow scope amendments to ISA 700 revised and ISA 260 revised as a result of the revisions to the IAASB code that require a firm to publicly disclose when a firm has applied the independence requirements for PIs. This is agenda item 5-C.1, subject to the slight amendments that were offered today. So how we're going to do it is we're going to ask for a vote for approval. We'll start with those who would like to dissent. Then we'll go to those who'd like to abstain and those who'd like to support. Remember, 12 votes are needed for approval. Now, as I remind you, the criteria for dissent is that you believe that the world public interest is better served without the amendment of the standard, and therefore the extant would still exist. So that is the criteria that I think we should all hold when we're making our decision. So I'll ask the board if anyone would like to dissent from the approval of the proposed narrow scope amendment. Warren, is that a dissent? One dissent. We will ask you to explain your rationale for dissent at the end. Anyone like to abstain? No abstentions. Okay, finally, we'd ask for those who'd like to approve the standard to raise their hand. Let the record note that 17 approvals. Okay, so the standard is passed. I think at this opportunity, we'll ask Warren why he believes the world would be better off with the extant standard. We're clearly silencing him. It's the microphone's not working.
And it's ironic, I'm sitting next to Sue. So I acknowledge that this is a limited scope amendment to the audit report. And I do appreciate the efforts done or taken by the task force to address sort of the tension or disconnect, if you like, between a requirement in the IAASB code and ISA 700. I also acknowledge all of the due processes that have been followed. My primary concern is whether or not this additional disclosure in the audit report provides useful information to the users of the financial statements, including the users of the audit reports, and I believe that it does not. As a result, I think we actually would be better off leaving the audit report as it is, because the audit report should provide a succinct and unambiguous explanation of whether or not the financial statements achieve fair presentation. It is already entitled the reports of the independent auditor. So there is no need to clarify that the auditor is independent in accordance with whatever provisions. The title is really sufficient. The requirements and laying out the auditor's responsibilities are also, in my mind, sufficient to make it clear to any reader that the person expressing an opinion on the financial statements is in fact independent. And I think that the added complexity detracts really from the simplicity and the neatness of what an audit report should ultimately contain. In essence, really, the additions are largely repetitive. And I think that an alternate mechanism from reporting would have actually been more useful. I think that an exploration, for example, of using a transparency report, just as an illustration, would have given an auditor an opportunity to elaborate on sort of core issues relating to independence, and that would have provided useful information to members of the public and in turn users of the financial statements. I accept the emphasis placed on independence itself, but in my mind, independence is inseparable from other aspects which define whether an auditor has or has not acted ethically. And I also remain concerned that we set a precedent for, progressively adding more and more to our audit reports. Again, I accept that this is a relatively narrow scope amendment, but if we look at the history of audit reporting over the last 10 years, what used to be a succinct one-page document is now ballooned into a very complex, difficult to read document. I'm not sure that there is a marginal significant value being added as a result of all of this. So really, to summarize, yes, I believe the task force has solved the conundrum of IAASB has a disclosure requirement. This is a way of operationalizing the disclosure requirement, but the costs of the operationalization exceed the benefit. And I remain uncertain as to why a disclosure requirement was introduced in the IAASB code, but accepting that it is there, I ultimately think that ISA 700 was sufficient to do the job without any revision. So Sue, I am sorry to dissent on this occasion, but there you have it.
Well, that's a well-articulated dissent. So you clearly have thought a lot about it, and it's based upon your comments. You've been relatively, pretty much entirely consistent throughout the phase of this whole track one phase. So thank you for that, Warren, and thank you for putting that on the record. So the next question we have is about re-exposure and the rationale and conclusion for whether re-exposure is needed. I believe you will present the task force view on that.
Yes, I think it's summarised in the issues paper, but just to highlight that we, the PI task force considered the major changes in the relevant requirements from the ED, and we consider that re-exposure is not necessary. The changes after the exposure clarify but don't substantially alter the key elements that were addressed in the ED, nor have they resulted in a departure from the objective of relevant to track one of the project. In addition, there are no substantial changes to the key concepts of the projects. All the key elements presented in the ED have been retained. Some of the elements have been modified, clarified, or strengthened in response to comments received on exposure and in related coordination with activities with IAASB. No new key concepts have been introduced, and the changes to the text post-exposure in response to feedback from respondents to the ED do not fundamentally or substantively change the proposals in the ED. Further, the PI task force is of the view that re-exposing the proposed narrow scope amendments will not result in new information or concerns that have not been aired already through the comment letters or through the subsequent coordination and outreach activities that have been addressed in the agenda materials post-exposure. So Tom, that summarises our views.
Okay. So we actually have to take a formal vote on whether we believe re-exposure is necessary. A vote of 12 board members in favor of re-exposure is what it's required to trigger a re-exposure. I'm just gonna take a guess and ask for approval of the task force's recommendation that re-exposure is not required, and start with that and see where we land. So who believes that re-exposure is not warranted? Raise their hand. Thank you, Warren. Yeah. No, what's a question? What? Maybe we should do that to torture you. So that is no re-exposure is required. So just a reminder, Sue, in paragraph 28 of the issues paper, we proposed an effective date of December 15th for audits of financial statements for periods beginning on or after December 15, 2024, to align with the effective date of the revisions of the IAASB code in relation to listed entity and PI. I assume that is still the task force view. I'm just confirming that that is the case. Still, okay. That is, we're done. So my next job in a very anti-ADO moment is to congratulate the task force, the former chair, Josephine, all the staff involved, particularly Kalina and Ida. Sue, particularly for your patience in stewarding this project, which hasn't been without some headaches throughout, and on the board for the approval of standards. So congratulations to you all. Sue, you have any parting comments on track one?
Probably to say we'll be back, because obviously we have part two, but just to reiterate the thanks, and especially the task force has been very patient, and the staff, in particular Kalina, has done some outstanding work. So thank you for that. And then probably just a heads up for the board on what is coming next on this. The basis for conclusions will be shared with you for fatal flaw sometime in July. The final text of the standard, I believe, or the amendments, I believe, will be posted to the IAASB website probably next week. And the final pronouncement will be published once it's been approved by the PAOB. And I understand the meeting timetable is such that may be October, but that will be coming. And then, as I say, we'll be back with part two. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jim and Michael, anything you would like to add?
Are we allowed to congratulate?
Yes, you are. We
Okay.
haven't imposed a new rule yet.
Okay, respecting that, congratulations to the board and the task force.
Michael, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'd add congratulations and looking forward to track two.
We all are. Billy, any concluding remarks?
No, nothing, Tom. I think Sue has indicated the next step, so we're good.
Okay. On to the next topic. We're going to revisit some of the items that were raised by the board on 5,000 earlier the week. I don't want to make this a drafting session. I think what the task force is seeking to do is to get your reactions to the direction that they've gone in response to the comments received during the week. They're going to spend a little bit more time on drafting between now and the publication of the proposed exposure draft for vote next week. And so again, let's focus on, have we gotten this directionally right, rather than did we get the semicolon or the colon right? So I suggest that's the approach that we take. Josephine, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, on that, one of my favorite comments that came through last week was, this is not a very elegant semicolon, which made us all giggle as to what does an elegant semicolon look like? Maybe it has a hat, scarf.
Calligraphy.
So, so thank you very much. We were here bright and early and engaged with another board, a couple of board members, quite a few board members already on some bits and pieces. On the whole, it felt like it was a fairly good shape. There's some little niggles that some of us start again. Some board members want us to just address, but to Tom's point, this is not approval now. We're just getting the direction. Are we in the right direction? And are we heading for approval Wednesday? And is there anything still that is still an issue that we need to address? But I will. I did have quite a lot of detail, but Billy and Tom said no. So I will just pop through roughly what we have here, just to so also it's on the public record as well. So essentially we're looking at some of the targeted amendments that we made in agenda item 2I. So I'll work on primarily the requirements. I'll pull out some comments on some of the application material where I think it's important, but generally in most cases, the application material will have been amended to clarify and to align with the requirements where we've made changes. So I won't go into too much detail on those. So if we're thinking about the first piece, it was that introductory piece. If you recall, we revised wording here, so it was actually better aligned with the definition of sustainability information, including that reference to factors, which was causing some concern both at the board meeting and of course in our offline comments. It was a little bit confusing. We updated 2A in response to board comments, both offline and in the plenary, and we have changed the wording of the third sentence to mirror the wording that deals with the exact same issue in the definition of GHG statement in 3410. So aligned with another assurance standard is actually a better way forward. And the last sentence is aligned with the definition of other information, which will of course be revised in the full turnaround, including subject to the assurance engagement and the assurance report thereon, because we've missed that piece. In terms of everyone's favorite paragraph 9, are we in, are we out? So are we in both? We've revised and split this into 2 paragraphs to better clarify when IAASB 3410 or 5000 applies, with 9 was trying to demonstrate when you absolutely are in 3410, and 9A was trying to clarify when you're in 5000. We had quite a lot of comments on this particular set of paragraphs, set of requirements this morning. And once I've gone through the proposals in 2I, we'll pop back to that one because we think we actually have a solution, which was actually raised to us by our chair. So therefore it's fabulous and we're all going for it. Now, in terms of 16TT, we got some great feedback on the issues around the differentiation between analytical procedures and substantive analytical procedures. It was causing confusion. It was agreed by the board that using the term analytical procedures throughout the document would be more appropriate, because within the context of requirements, what you have to do, the work effort, is clear. So we've obviously deleted that definition of substantive analytical procedures, and you'll see some other changes, of course, trickle through where we've used that term substantive in relation to analytical procedures and made sure that we've removed those. And of course, the definition of substantive procedures has been aligned as well. We made some minor tweaks to the definition of sustainability information and of course sustainability matters to address the board offline comments. And then we also agreed to make sure that those floated through again in some of the application material where we needed to. Now then, we also had the next piece was using work performed by others. We agreed to bring back in some of the elements related to using the work of others. We have, of course, though, introduced, this is where I wanted to point out, paragraph A24A, which is a new paragraph drawing together some of the application material from paragraph A90 and additional context to make it clear when individuals from a firm other than the practitioner's firm are members of the engagement team, in particular, when they perform assurance procedures and are also under the direction and supervision of the practitioner, then they are members of the engagement team. Up front and center now. And then paragraph goes on further to make it clear that when individuals are not members of the engagement team, those individuals are referred to in this standard as another practitioner. So, and then it then floats through that it makes it easier when you're going through the requirements that you don't need to keep repeating this piece all the way through. So we've made the clarifying changes there. In terms of paragraph 41, we've taken that a level up and not included another practitioner there because it was causing that circularity and confusion. So we now say it's a firm other than the practitioner. And then in terms of paragraph 50, we've obviously made some additional clarifying changes. We simplified the heading, as I say, because we have a 24A now, we can do that. And in paragraph 51, we clarified the language to make it clearer here that it's the findings from another practitioner's work that are subject to the communications. That was causing a little bit of confusion. And then we've made corrections and clarifications to the related application material in paragraphs A119, 120, 121, and A126A. Paragraph 58, we've amended the title of the section. So now that section deals with fraud and non-compliance, to not give the impression as well that this is the only requirement we have in the entire standard that deals with fraud. And as we said in the explanatory memorandum, we are going to do that signposting. This is where you'll find everything on fraud. So it all comes together. Then the other area was materiality. The board suggested that the standard needs to be clear on the difference between the practitioner's materiality and materiality used by the entity in their materiality process to determine which disclosures should be included in the sustainability information in accordance, of course, with the criteria. This might be exacerbated by the fact that the lead into paragraph 90 was not explicit on what the practitioner's materiality was useful. So we've changed the lead into paragraph 90 to explicitly state why the practitioner actually considers and determines materiality. We've made a few changes to the application material there to improve clarity. So A263, A263A, 268, A268A, keeping up, and then A269, and then finally A271. Now, in terms of materiality, the other thing that I do want to mention is that it is because of the nature of performing the planning and performing the engagement, materiality does sit in various places in the application materials. So what I said, I think on Monday, yes, Monday. No, Tuesday. What I said on Tuesday was in the explanatory memorandum, we will have a piece on materiality to show how it all fits together. So it's a little bit like the fraud signposting, because it's very difficult to make these steps explicit without them becoming circular and causing even more confusion. So that will make it clear where all the different pieces are and how it all fits together. But it's not something we can do with the standard, because the standard goes through the planning and performance process. It's linear versus iterative versus logical. Now, in terms of responding to risks of material misstatement, the board requested for that essential explanatory material to parallel paragraph 124R for the limited assurance engagement. So that's what we have there. And we also added new application material in A370AL. To address concerns that the practitioner may only apply tests of controls in a limited assurance engagement. And we also added a further paragraph to explain that because the level of assurance obtained in a limited assurance engagement is lower than in a reasonable assurance engagement, the substantive procedures will vary in nature, timing from, and are less in extent than for a reasonable assurance engagement. This is actually my second coffee and I still can't seem to pull my words together this morning. Apologies. In terms of paragraph 124RA, the board requested a requirement for reasonable assurance engagements similar to the requirement in 330 paragraph 18, which would require the practitioner to perform substantive procedures for each material disclosure, irrespective of the assessed risks of material misstatement. But 5000 does not have the concept of material disclosure in the same way that the ISAs have the concept of material classes of transactions, account balances, and so forth. However, ultimately, it is all linked to the decisions of the intended users. And so we have used that idea instead. And then, of course, we have added application material, which is new application material, to provide guidance on what the practitioner may consider in determining the need to design and perform substantive procedures in this situation. And wording was added similar to paragraph A44 of ISA 330 to explain that the practitioner's consideration of the disclosures for which, if a misstatement were to occur, there's a reasonable possibility of the misstatement being material, which may also assist in determining the nature, time, and extent of the substantive procedures. So we're bringing as much as 330 in that we can, but in the context and through the lens of sustainability assurance. The other area was reporting. And on reporting in paragraph 169C, little 6, big A, on reporting, the requirement regarding the identification of the applicable criteria was added back as discussed with the board. The only other thing that we missed is that on the end tail of that, it says including where it's located. But of course, that piece, including where it is located, would only be in the situation for entity developed criteria. So we are aware that we do need to pop back and just fix that, that piece there. And then based on the discussion, and then of course, now we're in paragraph 169DV, based on discussions held in plenary, the task force moved the practitioner's statement regarding the difference in the level of work performed in a limited assurance engagement opposed to reasonable assurance engagement from the summary of the work performed up to the basis of conclusion. And of course, the same change will be reflected in the illustrative report. And we did include just the one, the limited assurance report, so you could see actually what it looks like in the actual report. Then finally, we restructured the whole section of the other reporting requirements to mirror the requirements in paragraphs 43 to 44 of ISA 700, and this is in paragraphs 172 and 172A. Noting that the former requirements were a bit confusing as they were referring to topics, aspects of topics of disclosure, and not actually to the reporting elements of 5,000. So we've done that. And of course, we've modified A497 to reflect those requirements and guidance. And then in 184 all the way through to 186, of course, we finally went through and clarified the requirements in respect of comparative information in response to board comments, both offline and during the plenary. And I believe that concludes the main changes in summary on agenda item 2I. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. How would you like to handle this? Should we open it up to the floor for comments? Okay. Reactions? Adam.
Thank you, Tom. I'll just dive straight in to keep in check. In respect of the definition and paragraph 2A, I was wondering how this is going to work if this ever gets posted to our electronic standards, where we have supporting sustainability information, which then grays up into a definition. But we then, in the subsequent parts, use sustainability information in an entirely different manner, because then it is intended to be read as sustainability information subject to assurance. So, and then that's also, yeah, we define it one way, but we use it differently. So, and it could bring a complexity when it goes to the digital environment. So I still think it's a little bit convoluted. Shall I just go on?
Sure.
Yes, so using the work by another practitioner, so largely okay with it. I have a suggestion though in A90, and you may remember the comment I made before is this there needs be a bit of a threshold before you get here. So the initial effort may needs to be to use supervision, direction, and review and involve practitioners that would be subject to the supervision, direction, and review. And in A90, I appreciate the paragraph being severely modified, and it currently reads ordinarily may seek. And seek. So could we change that to may ordinarily plan? Because that is something that is being driven by the practitioner, rather than, okay, I'm just going to look around. Okay, let me where we then move on to maybe then move on to double materiality. I just need to find where it sits in the application material. Yes, so the discussion that we had with the board in respect of double materiality was one where we said, well, but you still end up with one of the two. So it's either impact or financial, and that's the one that needs to be applied. So I'm absolutely fine with A268A that explains the concept of double materiality. I'm just concerned with the sentence in A269 where it reads that in determining materiality, the practitioner may take into account multiple factors like financial and impact materiality. So that has just been defined in the previous paragraph as being double materiality. And then we say, however, the practitioner is not required to consider or determine a double materiality. So that seems to directly conflict with each other. I know what we're trying to say, but and I've been sitting with Joanna, we couldn't find the words for it to explain this properly. Maybe you want to have another go or just take this bit out. Let's see, then. I've noted the moving up of the statements in respect of limited assurance and reasonable assurance and the level of assurance and the difference therein. I would still have a desire to make it much more abundantly prominent that there's a difference, but it's now on the front page. So I'm happier, but I would, I would want to request the task force to make this a specific question in the explanatory memorandum on the prominence of the difference. Yes, if you put them side by side, to a large extent, they may look and feel the same. And it's hanging off those few words. And I think that was it for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go back to others, I just wanted to remind Josephine that we were going to go back to Dan to give a little bit more flavor to what we meant on paragraph 9. So it just doesn't look like the chair is issuing a fiat, but here.
Yeah, apologies. I did say go back and then I got so excited to get all your comments, I totally forgot. So Dan, please, over to you.
Okay, thanks. Well, as Josephine mentioned, the board did have a number of comments, obviously on Tuesday, about paragraphs 9 and 9A, and the task force tried to address some of those comments through the revisions that you see now in agenda item 2I. We did have still yet a number of further conversations this morning with individual board members about those two paragraphs, and still some concerns about the complexity of the wording, maybe trying to cover the waterfront, try to deal with every possibility when in fact in simplest terms, what we're trying to say is that when you have sustainability information, ISSA 5000 applies in all circumstances, unless you're in a situation where you have a greenhouse gas statement and you've been engaged to report or provide a separate conclusion on that statement, full stop. So as Tom said, we're not going to be drafting on the fly here during this session, but the task force will look at the possibility of basically deleting paragraphs 9 and 9A and replacing them with either a single sentence or perhaps a single paragraph around paragraph 1 in the introduction that says what I just said.
be read. Are people comfortable with that approach? I think, okay, so we'll get some draft in, be on the lookout for drafting on that. Okay, well, now we're going to, I assume others were going to raise that comment throughout too, so I figured we'd dispose of that issue. Okay, Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. So I did have the comments on 9, so I'm glad we're taking care of that. And I don't know if you mentioned this 169.5 where we put that back in. I think I discussed that already this morning. We are going to move that up, right? No?
Oh, 1 second. We're all scrolling.
Sorry, those were my easy ones. Those were the 2 that I thought I discussed with.
What was the paragraph?
One, you're saying 169.5.
Where we put the paragraph back in that had been deleted.
Yes, we did.
Then I thought I had a conversation this morning that several people had thought that should be earlier in the requirements in that section.
No, because because then we're back to the same issue we had before, that we by explaining that, identifying that at the beginning, we're expressing an opinion, then expressing an opinion. So the compromise here is that essentially you're expressing a conclusion in 6a(b), which makes reference to the applicable criteria. And then what follows that is make sure you're identifying that applicable criteria or framework criteria. And if it's entity developed criteria, you then do the cross-reference to where it's located. So we're not moving it from here. So we brought it back in and we put it in a much better place. So now the 2 fit together.
And it mostly aligns with the illustrative report as well. Thank you. First of all, I should generally say, because I just lost my connection, that I thought a lot of the targeted changes that we saw were fully responsive to the conversations that we had the other day on it. I do have a question. Is there a plan to address the language of system of quality control versus internal control? That's just a question. And then my document is disappeared, so I don't have anything else but that question for the moment.
Yes, so system of quality control versus internal control in respect to internal audit function, which is the point that Sue raised, is not really an issue. It's actually a 620 issue. And so for now, what we would like to do on exposure is obviously release the draft as it is as it's described in the conforming amendments to ISQ and 1I and the ISAs. So we won't make any changes to that particular paragraph at this stage. You said system of quality control versus system of internal control.
Sorry, system of internal control.
Okay. Sachika?
Thank you. Sorry, just a moment. I'm scrolling, and I just want to raise one point. It's about comparative information. Paragraph 185. Are you ready? Okay. First of all, I really like the task force solution on 184 and 184 big A. I really like the solution, so thank you so much. But regarding 185, still I'm not very clear about the meaning, so I just want to explain the reason why it's not clear to me in the public record. What is not very clear to me is the wording that say if the comparative information is not covered by the practitioner's assurance conclusions. And I think the meaning is that whether the assurance conclusion refer to the period. But when I read this sentence, it seems to suggest to me that it means you, practitioner, assure literally assure that period, but I think that is not the meaning. Really? Then I was again confused because I think it is not the case that it is not usually the case that the practitioner reassure the comparative information again. Rather, it's just usually the case that rather you just check the consistency in accordance with 184 big A, right? So I think there are subtle nuance differences. And it just took about, if I can use the wording in 710, whether it is comparative financial information or whether it is corresponding figures. And that point is not very clear to me. So if that can be clarified, I think it is very helpful. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sachiko. And we did have the benefit of having a conversation this morning with Sachiko. I think we were trying to be, I'm using Isabel's word, clever in aligning, but in fact, what we just need to do is just align it almost identically to, so we got there, but we didn't get quite far enough. So we do have some other phraseology in 710, which we didn't use. We used alternative phraseology, and we just need to go back to the source. And we talked that through with Sachiko, and hopefully that will help with any confusion also that others might have with this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks. And I just want to echo that I think the task force has been very responsive to many of the complex issues that we raised, and generally very supportive. The 2 points I wanted to make, just on the other practitioner material, just generally, I found different wording used or styles used across the different paragraphs, and just ask you to make sure there's consistency there around, is it using the work of the practitioner? Is it using the information from the work? Is it using the audit evidence from the work, and so forth, just things like that. And I appreciated the change to the report to move up the paragraph on limited assurance. Just wondered if you would consider moving it even a little bit higher within the basis for the conclusion. And I did reach out to Claire and one of the other staff members with a suggestion of possibly making it even closer to the introductory paragraph on the basis for conclusion, because I think that would give it even more prominence than it has right now. But apart from that, I was pretty happy with everything. Thank you.
Okay. Julie?
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank the task force, because 3 of my, I'll call them big issues, I felt the drafting represent what we talked about, and I really appreciate what you've done there. Just a question for clarification. In 129L, we've changed something there in the requirement around analytical procedures under the limited assurance. We've changed little b, and we've removed the concept of an expectation. And so I appreciate that in a limited assurance engagement, your expectation does not need to be as precise, because you're not performing that procedure to identify a material misstatement. But I still would have thought we'd have an expectation there consistent with how it's written in 3410. So it's more of just understanding what the change was and why.
Okay. Diane?
Thanks, Tom. And I will thank the task force, because I think they've been working very hard, and similar to Julie, I think very responsive to the comments that were raised, and in particular, some of the matters that I felt a little bit strongly about. And so I'll just talk about a couple things. Number one, in the definition of another practitioner, we talked about whether we thought that was warranted. I understand and appreciate the additions in the paragraph that was added at A24A, and I'm comfortable with where we are right now we'll see, what type of reaction we get when this goes out. But I do think what you've done right now is fine dealing with that. I also was happy with the change made to 124RA. I did suggest some simplified language just to make it a little bit clearer as to what the auditor should do, but I was happy with that. And then finally on the materiality, also happy. I do acknowledge the comments that Ado made earlier about the materiality and agree with those. I also sent forward some suggestions to A263A, but I do think we were nice, crisp and clear, especially with dealing with how you can set materiality at the group levels and those types of concepts. So I was pleased with that. Thank you.
Shall we?
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, colleagues. Just to the broad question about whether the turn document is in the right direction, absolutely. So thanks to Josephine and team. I really appreciate this morning having the opportunity to speak with task force members, the drafting experts and staff. So I want to express my appreciation. I'll go from top to bottom so that I can use the next comment kind of function on my word. So just quickly a few things. Paragraph 2, just repeat of what Ado has mentioned. And when I was looking at this, I just wonder if the potentially simple solution is to just remove for purposes of this ISA from paragraph 2, because I think just generally in this is when we refer to sustainability information, we're talking about those that are subject to the assurance work. So now 2 and 2A put together, and we've said that multiple times by multiple people, it just looked like we're immediately contradicting each other. So I thought maybe a simple solution is just remove the first few words. Paragraph 9, thanks, Dan. I really like that proposal to remove it entirely, because I do think 9A is problematic. And when you have, okay, this is what they say, this is what they say, you try to see whether you're covering the whole universe of sustainability information assurance. And I don't think that's necessary, because I really like what we have done with 9, making it very clear. So if we have an introduction, I think that will make it very simple and straightforward. So I want to support that. Next comment. The one on 169, auditor's report, 6 big A. I'm okay with putting it back in here. And I think just now, Josephine, you were saying that you will look into the including where it is located, because now it's applicable to both framework criteria and the entity developed criteria. And it's now just a little bit silly that for framework criteria, you need to indicate where it is located. So if the task force could have a look at that, that would be helpful. And then same paragraph, but 5. This is D5, where we added the bit on the limited assurance engagement supportive. The only thing is I think we just need to add a conditionality here, like in the case of a limited assurance engagement states that whatever, otherwise it looks like it's applied to everything, which is not true. Now to application material, A90, the one on the other practitioner, supportive of what has been put in there. The reference at the end, we talk about if you are able to direct and supervise, then all the requirements relating to team apply. So that's great. And then including, and I know that it's including, and then we refer to 44 to 47. And I think 44 to 47 is very important because it talks about the direct and supervision review. But when you immediately go to A91, you then refer to 50 to 53. And I think that the bit on independence is featured very strongly there. It looks a little bit lopsided if we don't refer to the relevant ethical requirement, including those relating to independence in A90. So I spoke with the team, and I was just suggesting that maybe in A90, you should also refer to paragraph 33 to 35 as well, because it is an important aspect when we look at engagement team. The other point that I'm going to raise here, this is a slightly bigger point for me. This is A119, again on other practitioner. So the addition that we have here, we talk about the extent of your evaluation of work by another practitioner is influenced by, and you have two bullets there. The first bullet talks about overall significance of the work, and I absolutely agree with that. I think that's really important, and I like that bullet. The second bullet is causing problem for me, because now we're saying the extent of evaluation of work is influenced by your ability to obtain access. If it is significant, then you need to just do what you need to do, including if you can't get access, alternative work. And I think what we have in A126A, which is great, is I'm very supportive of that. You know, it may end up with a scope limitation. So what you have in the second bullet, I like the content, I just don't like it here because it sounds like if you can't get the ability to gain access will actually affect the extent of the work that you do. I know what we mean here, but it just may be sending the wrong signal. So I would suggest that we move a little bit of the content in this second bullet to be closer to A126A, sort of as a precursor to that. So immediately you see, oh, if you can't do that, then it may potentially be a scope limitation, or you need to do alternative procedures. So this to me is quite a big point. I think it's potentially misleading. And I'll be done. Oh, okay, so this is my last point, and this is the same point that Eric has raised. On the illustration, I am supportive of putting it under basis for conclusion. I think it gives it more prominence. But I think, you know, when we start reading it, and we know when readers start looking at, oh, we are independent of this and that, you know, we apply, it's ISQM1 and so on. These are sort of stock wording, and people just start losing attention. So they may not get to that important bit that we want to highlight on limited assurance. I know that in the requirement, we have it there, so it doesn't matter the sequence, but I think the illustration just does influence how people do it in practice. So I would support what Eric has said in terms of putting it a little bit up. And I thought, you know, we can move it to before our responsibility under this standard. That will give it a little bit more prominence. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would it be a good moment to pause it, because some of these are very specific comments. I don't want you to have to go through the whole list multiple times.
Well, some of them are literally going to be, let's just take away and fix and noodle, but there are a couple of things. So Julie asked a specific question, of course, on the analytical procedures, because we made the change to A129L little b. There's a couple of things. It didn't come up in plenary, but we had a lot of offline comments on this, that this was actually, it implied almost a step too far in a limited assurance engagement. And instead, what we did was we aligned this wording a bit closer to what we have in 315, and then the expectation is implied. So ultimately, what you really want to do is just make sure that you're considering any unusual and unexpected relationships. And so it's implied. So I mean, you're right, it wasn't raised at the board meeting, but we did have quite a few saying it's too much. So can we just dial it back a little bit? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it okay if I respond? I understand that. Then my concern is then that this isn't very differentiated from risk assessment type analytical procedures. So I'll just leave that there, but that would be my concern with the change at the moment.
So we'll take that back. And then the only thing I probably need other board member comments on is Chun Wee's comment on A119, because I think when you are evaluating the work, the extent to which you can do that is affected by those two. It is affected by the ability to obtain access. That is a matter of fact. And then it's here because then it sets you up to think about what Caillou was talking about in the meeting, that, you know, the further along the chain you go, the harder it is to access that information. And we wanted to bring his point into the guidance so that the practitioner is aware that this could could be an issue. And so you're making that decision and thinking about, well, how much can I do? And these are the two areas where I really need to think about how much I can do that. And then when you do have a situation where you can't get the access and you can't get the evidence that you need in an alternative means, then you may have a scope limitation. So I feel that I wouldn't really want to move that further up. I think it's actually more confusing, and maybe the issue perhaps is some of the wording, and we can look at that, but I do want other comments on that because I thought that was actually addressing Kaiu's point quite well. I think the task force did a good job pulling that together. So yeah, back to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to come back in, John?
Just very quickly, and I like what has been added there. I just feel that including it in this particular paragraph may send the wrong signal, as I said, and I thought it will be better if we, because it is now quite far away from the addition in A126A, because I think they sort of like fit very well together. So it does affect, the extent to which you can look at the work, but if it is significant to you, then you need to find alternative means of getting sufficient appropriate evidence. If not, it's a scope limitation. So I just thought the positioning may actually be misleading, and if you can just help have a look at the wording, that'd be great.
So just to clarify, my view is that it isn't, it's actually right, because those are the two things that you think of when you're evaluating. So to move it would mean we then have to write the same thing and we'd repeat it almost. So if you're saying, well, maybe look at the wording, keep it there, maybe look at the wording so it's not misleading, then the task force certainly can take that away. But if you want it taken out altogether, then I do need comments, particularly from Kaiu and other board members, if they agree with that, because that's quite a big move and we were addressing an important point. Thank you, Chun-Wee.
Thank you, Josephine. And I like the words, as I said, in terms of describing, down the value chain, in effect, how much you can get. And therefore, I'm not suggesting removing the word. I'm just suggesting that we look at the positioning. If fixing the word, make it clearer, will solve my problem, I'll be happy to explore as well. Thanks.
Thank you. You want to come back?
I think obviously we have our solution here, as always, on my left-hand side. I think actually maybe then what we need to is probably just to have a cross-reference to A126A from that particular bullet point. Then we're addressing Kaiu's issue and your concern, because then they're connected. Would that help? Perfect, thank you.
You don't call him Mr. Fix-It for nothing. Greg.
Thanks, Tom. I just want to talk about materiality. And I take the point about the explanatory memorandum, Josephine, and I'm keen to get this out. So, but I guess I just want to reinforce what I said on Tuesday, which is I think it's still a bit subtle, the two-step sort of all the information that's subject to the assurance engagement, what's the more important information, and within that more important information, what are the tolerances for misstatement? So that at the moment, I think there's a lot of good additions. I like the changes actually that have been made to the application material, and it sort of hints strongly at the two steps. But I think it could be stronger. I think the explanatory memorandum will help to sort of draw that together. So let's make sure we do that, because I don't think we want to give the impression that all of the information that's subject to the insurance engagement needs a whole lot of work done on it. So it's just there's a subset there. There's some more important stuff. There's some less important stuff. On the more important stuff, that's where we have to work out what's our tolerance for misstatement. Because ultimately that's the key stuff. That's the key information that we've determined for users. So probably not much can now be done between now and Monday midday on it, because I had a look at it and I thought, I think a bridge is needed between A270 and 271, but I couldn't come up with the words to to do it. So it's probably in the explanatory memorandum. Yep, ultimately. But let's get some feedback from you, from practitioners.
Okay, so what I hear you is you'd be satisfied with getting some feedback. It's not a fatal flaw for you. Thank you. That's helpful for the task force to know as they're going to vote. Wendy, you found your computer went back on.
Well, the internet, I downloaded it onto my machine. So I just wanted to clarify the question that I had was in the definitions on paragraph 16 as to whether or not we're going to change internal control to system of internal control. It had nothing to do with quality control, even though that's what I wrote in my notes. So that was the question. It was a comment that we had sent in, and I think we also had discussed it, what month? March. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, no, I got that. I realized that that's what you meant. So we will go back and look at it, but I think we do actually have an issue in the sense that we're dealing with a sustainability information here. And we're not dealing with the 315 world, but we'll have another look at it and see if we can make that work. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on the issues that were brought back to us? Josephine, you have anything further you want to say?
No, I mean, thank you again, everybody. Thanks for popping to us this morning. I know we got you up early, so apologies for that. But that's helped us, and a few little bits and pieces to noodle on a little bit more and make some changes and some cross references, etc. So we'll go away and do that. If you have specific wording you wanted us to contemplate, then please do send that along ASAP so we can actually just pull that in as we start looking through the changes. And then the task force are going to be meeting for the rest of the day as well to look at all the offline comments as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I guess before we conclude the session, Adam?
Sorry. Yes, thank you. So, Josephine, I think I saw you nodding when I asked about the prominence of that statement in the assurance report to make that a specific question in the explanatory memorandum. I never got an answer on it.
I'm sorry, Ado. Yeah, I mean, anything that we're changing, which is beyond the format, is of the standard report. We'll have a whole explanation about the reporting format we've used, why we've looked to 700 and etc. And so it would seem natural that there will be a question. And how that's articulated, we'll obviously think about. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. One last thing before I do this is we brought back a selective list of issues based upon what the task force thought was the most important things to bring back. It would be useful right now to hear from the board if there were any other issues that you would have expected to be brought back based upon the conversations that would be fatal flaws for you as we move to approval. Does anyone have any of those? This is really an important thing for the task force to have a sense of confidence as we go to next week. Okay, so what is the time frame to the team on when the next document will be turned and out to the board?
Yeah, so we still intend to have the document turned and available to you from lunchtime Eastern Standard Time on Monday next week.
Okay, that's very great. So we're still congratulating people. So really congratulations to the task force, to the staff, and to our drafting team. This has been an extraordinary amount of work accomplished in a very short period of time. And we know that this is just the end of the beginning, I guess, really, when we approve this out, because this outreach plan that we intend to discuss with you next week is going to be very intensive and require everyone around this table to be involved in that process. But I'm really, this is what we talked about, the board being more agile, more responsive, faster to market. This is an example among many that we've done recently in terms of showing our agility and our responsiveness. I think I want to ask Michael and Jim if they want to share any reflections as we go to a vote next week on this proposed standard.
Well, just I want to share the from a CAG perspective, we had an update meeting earlier in June, and while the CAG did have numerous points and they were brought up at this meeting this week, we appreciate that you've considered those points. A lot of the work we're going to do on sustainability will be coming up in September, but I think I guess I'll just congratulate the task force for their substantial progress to get you where you are. And I think the sense of the CAG is, this is a new standard. Let's get something exposed. Let's get some feedback. And I would say that's was one of the overwhelming points that we had from a CAG perspective. Thanks.
Michael?
Yes, also I think great progress to get these changes analyzed and worked into the draft. And it will be interesting to see the next version on Monday when everything is put together into one document, I assume at that point, rather than just the selected changes. So that'll give a fuller picture, I think, of what the standard is going to look like. And look forward to next week's discussion.
Okay, great. So we will be ready for the next draft on Monday. And remember, the goal is not to allow perfect to be the enemy of good here, but to get something out into the marketplace quickly. That's a sound basis for consultation with probably a bigger breadth of stakeholders than we've ever engaged with before. We will certainly need, I'm not sure we're not using the term army anymore, the whole crew pitching in terms of comment letter analysis and outreach, etc. So, okay, I think we're going to bring the meeting to a close. I will want to say a couple of things, but first of all, if Adriana could stand up, I just want to say thank you for all your work. As a study here, and we will certainly miss you, but you will always be an alumna of the IAASB. Old life, it's all embedded. My standard setting experience just goes, but you will always be an alumna of the IAASB, and welcome here. And who knows, we may draft you back into other efforts in the future. Thank you. I don't see, where's Sylvia? We want to thank you for all you've done on behalf of our board and the multiple board members. And we will miss your efforts too on behalf of the IAASB. And TAs are very much part of the alumni network as well. So thank you, Sylvia. Sarah's not joining us in person, but I think she deserves a round of applause as well. She served the organization very well over the year. One other person I have to thank for all their efforts on behalf of the public interest, and my understanding is it may be your last in-person session with us, Michael Haithman, who's had 2 goes at the PIOB and 2 tours of duty. Michael, we've really appreciated all of your insights and the way you've worked with us over the years. And, we just want to acknowledge your contribution to the public interest, not just in your role at the PIOB, but throughout your whole career. So thank you, Michael, for joining us in person today and throughout the previous years. So thank you. Okay, it's hard to say that the meeting is done because it's not really done. We have a full session left where we're going to seek approval. We do have a couple of things that are going to happen today. The LCE task force is going to meet after the close of the meeting in the green room. The IAASB liaison working group will be meeting at the close of the meeting in the orange room. And Billy, of course, is reminding me of what I'm forgetting, but I noted it on LinkedIn yesterday. You haven't seen it yet. We've posted videos about going concern, the first of a series of videos. I would highly recommend you promoting it because it will encourage stakeholders to understand the rationale for our going concern proposals, but more importantly, to provide input into the process. So please do use our LinkedIn site, our Twitter, and YouTube channels, and promote them to stakeholders within your network. Just in general, I just really wanted to thank everyone for all their time and effort over the last few days, and obviously in the months. Our board meeting really doesn't just start once you get to New York. It starts the minute the last in-person plenary finishes. And, I think the staff usually get about half a day to relax. They usually have a get together the week afterwards to reflect and do a staff team building exercise. But then they're probably already planning the next meeting, and the task force are clearly doing that work. So particularly when you have other day jobs, we know that how much we just want you to know how much we appreciate your efforts on our behalf. And I wish everyone a safe journey home. I look forward to seeing you next week on the call and seeing you in person in September. Thank you. Should we turn off close the broadcast right now?